really want to discuss this Chris Hedges interview on the Krystal Kyle and Friends podcast. This is one that I have been waiting to see for a long time. And I do want to start with just giving massive credit to Kyle Kulinski and Krystal Ball for having this conversation, because literally just a couple weeks ago, I was kind of like they aren't, talking to enough people that fucking disagree with them, and they're just having on, people that are, backing up what they already believe and all this shit. And then I was like, why don't they talk to Chris Hedges like they said they would? And then like the next week, Chris Hedges on the show. So, props to you guys. You're having great conversations. Definitely really enjoyed listening to this one. And I would urge everyone to listen to the full thing, either on Spotify, where you can listen to the audio for free, or by subscribing to their Substack, as we do, in order to get the audio and video, which in my opinion is very much worth it.
Props to them. We have to come out here and be like honest, and say, hey, this was a good job.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, let's take a look here. This is about 40 so minutes into the podcast. They start talking about what exactly I hope they would talk about, which is third parties and Bernie Sanders, which is a big point of divergence between the likes of Krystal Kyle and Chris Hedges, who is very solidly in the, I will never support a Democrat. There is no reforming the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders, while his heart was in the right place, was basically a fool's errand. It was never going to work out. They were never going to give him the nomination. That's Hedges' stands. And needless to say, Kyle and Krystal have a little bit more of an optimistic take on reforming the Democratic Party. But yeah, let's go.
The Nixon thing was to set up this question, which has been bothering me. Whether it's the Nixon story, which really shows the power of bottom-up pressure, or the union stuff that we were just talking about, which again is bottom-up, or the civil rights movement more bottom-up. But you could also think of examples of the opposite in a sense, where you have these figureheads, you have these leaders who can sort of mobilize and channel the energy in very specific ways, whether it's Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Cesar Chavez. In 2016, Bernie Sanders sparked something and took that energy and was able to channel it and direct it and lead it in the proper direction. So do you think left-wing movements necessarily have to be bottom up, or is some semblance of a figurehead and leadership needed? And, I'm of the belief you actually need both of those things. I'm curious where you are on that.
No, it always has to be bottom up. I mean, history has shown that is the only way to affect change. Now, remember, the people who are in power write history, and they write a very distorted view of history to justify their own place in power. Antonio Gramsci, of course, is the best theorist on this. I would say that Bernie Sanders betrayed us. He led us down a cul-de-sac. He talked about a political revolution that ended as soon as Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden got the nomination. And we're not going to build, number one, a real political revolution during an election cycle. And we're certainly not going to build a political revolution by getting people to go out and vote for the Democratic Party leaders that are responsible for the deep betrayal and the rise of the corporate state. So I don't personally, I think Bernie is honest and decent, and I think his commitment to working men and women is real and has been true throughout his life, whether he's just naive or politically astute, because of course they destroy him. If he took on the Democratic Party establishment, he'd end up like George McGovern when he took on the animal ag industry, and they essentially drove him out of the Senate, and he was never elected to office again. Bernie knows that, and I think that's the kind of price he's willing to pay. He's not stupid, but he failed us. I mean, I was with Cornel West and I at the Democratic convention when Clinton became the nominee. Were with a group, several thousand homeless, unhoused people in Philadelphia. We marched on the Wells Fargo Center. So we were actually outside the appropriately named Wells Fargo Center when a lot of Bernie delegates, I mean, a large number, came out chanting, "This is what democracy looks like," and walked out while Bernie was giving his endorsement speech for Clinton. And Cornell, who's astute about everything, turned to me and said, "Bernie just missed his historical moment. He should have walked out with them."
So what should he have done, though? That's what I'm curious about.
Yo, talk about chills, man. When I heard him say that the first time yesterday, I was sitting in my room and I was stoned. And I was thinking a lot about the Bernie Sanders movement. And I was thinking about how good we felt that day that we were in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, listening to Vampire Weekend play right after we'd watched, Bernie Sanders speak, Nina Turner speak, Michael Moore speak, really feeling amped to the fucking gills, man. Really, really primed. And I always think about the energy that was in that arena in the middle of nowhere in flyover country, Iowa, cornfield country. And it was all there. Real palpable change was inside of that, place. And it all dissipated for nothing after the Biden, secured the nomination. And when he said that, that would have been Bernie walking out instead of going along with the charade of the DNC, taking it in the ass and walking, forward like a good little fucking boy or whatever the fuck. And had he turned his back on them and walked out with his people, with his movement, and said, we're going to power on, we're going to soldier on, that would have been the most powerful thing. I mean, that would have been an earth-shattering moment, as Cornel West put it, his historical moment. And, I don't know if I'll ever stop feeling cheated that we didn't get that from Bernie Sanders. And I think that's part of the real hurt that a lot of people have who are so there's been this real effort to reject Bernie Sanders because I feel like a lot of people feel scorned by him because he decided to play the game anyway, even when it was cheating him and cheating all of us by extension. And I think that Chris Hedges, better than anybody else, does a good job of articulating that and understanding the fact that is real. But the fact that doesn't necessarily undermine Bernie's commitment to the working class, and that those things exist together, and that's what complicates his legacy. It's not black and white. So anyway, I just wanted to jump in there and say that I really appreciate the nuance with which Chris Hedges grapples with this, and it kind of reflects my own inner turmoil, that loyalty that I feel towards Bernie Sanders for waking me up politically at all, but then also that sense of betrayal that I think is in all of us now.
Yeah, 100%.
Dude about everything turned to me and said, Bernie just missed his historical moment. He should have walked out with him.
So what should he have done, though? That's what I'm curious about. So, what do you think would have been ideal for him to do?
The only way is to build a political third party. Now, I say that I was Ralph Nader's speechwriter. I am fully aware of all of the obstacles thrown in front of third party candidates because I watched the Democratic Party do it to Ralph. And a lot of those tactics, of course, they used against Bernie. Without corporate money, neither Biden or Clinton would have gotten the nomination. Without the DNC working on behalf of first the Clinton and the Biden campaign, neither of them would have gotten the nomination. They have no real support. I think the thing is the Democratic Party, like the Republican Party, doesn't function as a real political party. The base has no say. You have the kind of political theater that they put on at convention time and everything else, but the base has completely been rendered impotent, has no real input into the celeb Biden. Who wants Biden? I mean, Biden was selected by all the Democratic donor class, Lloyd Blankfein, who are very upfront, by the way, and said that if Bernie was the nominee, they'd all vote for Trump. They weren't even hiding it. I think we have to be very wary of investing all of our hopes in a particular political figure. There's a great story about the Wobblies, the old radical union organizers, anarchists. I kind of am partial to anarchists, and they carried all these dock strikes on the West Coast, quite successful, shutting down ports until they got union contracts. And the San Francisco, I think it was San Francisco, called out their cops were beating all the dock workers, and so a bunch of Wobblies got on a boat from Portland or somewhere, LA or somewhere, and showed up at the docks. And they're coming off the gangway, and the cops are beating them, and goes, "Where's your leader? Where's your leader?" And one of the Wobblies said, "We're all leaders." I think there is no Messiah, and investing hopes in a Messiah, whoever that Messiah is, throughout history, I think has shown that it's that Messiah can often become as egregious a figure in terms of suppression or control as the one that was overthrown or replaced. We have to build powerful popular movements that are always antagonistic to power, no matter who has power, to hold them in check.
So a couple things.
That's
First of all, I'm interested in knowing more.
Kind of a bitch, though. I think I just want to point that out to everybody. The advice that he's giving is incredibly astute, right? But what he's basically telling us is that any hope that we put in a leader is completely is doomed to fail. It's foolish. And so what he's saying is we all have to be our own leaders. That was the whole point of that parable about the dock workers, right? He's saying that we all have to be the Wobblies. Well, the Wobblies are anarchists, and it's really fucking hard for anarchists to succeed in America for any number of reasons. One, because anarchists thrive best when there is as little bureaucracy as possible. And an anarchist philosophy is almost doomed to fucking fail, it seems, when you have to deal with the intense, endless bureaucratic red tape of the United States electoral system. But at the end of the day, it might be our only hope trying to figure that out. So I don't know. I'm just hoping that there are smarter people than me crunching those numbers, getting that shit figured out. But that's also kind of not the point.
Yeah, well, I think in particular, someone like Bernie Sanders, more so than even being a messiah necessarily, I think he was more just an outlet for the feelings that a lot of people in this country had, but necessarily didn't know how to express or articulate because there was no political vessel for that ideology. If it weren't for Bernie, Hillary basically would have just got the nomination and everyone would have just had to deal with it. And people like us would have just been like, I guess this is what's happening. But Bernie kind of brought out what was already there. He didn't invent that feeling. He didn't invent that, kind of populist, leftist, economic uprising, but he gave people an outlet to express that that's the way they felt. Again, it didn't really seem like that was a possible thing to feel or to experience via electoral politics up until him, because no Democrat talked like that, and the ones that did just got destroyed. They didn't have any chance, like Dennis Kucinich and stuff like that. So, Bernie kind of woke up this like sleeping beast in the electorate, which was like, oh shit, this kind of like, socialist policy or socialist light ideology is actually something that could be viable in America. This is actually something we could put our stocks in and actually elect. So, more so than a messiah necessarily, I think he was really more of an outlet for those people and was able to kind of spark that movement. And then, yeah, we can argue about, to what extent he dropped the ball in his exit from the primaries. But I think that's something that's important to mention too.
That's really astute. He was a beacon for all of these ideas to be amplified, right? He was like the lighthouse of progressive politics. And, I think the one thing that we have to hold on to in this, particularly trying time as we're rebuilding, this is, if anything, a rebuilding time period for the progressive movement, is that, that sleeping need, that brewing desire amongst the American people for liberation from corporate tyranny and government oversight and, surveillance and, just living hard, watching the planet be destroyed, all of those kinds of things. That's still there. Just need, that well is still there to be tapped into. We just have to do it. So, that's
right. And even though Bernie admittedly did, as some people like to say, sheep herd into the Democratic Party by encouraging his voters to vote for Hillary and Biden. That's undeniable. It's true. But at the same time, I think what's equally important is how many, people he sheep herded into leftism in general. Think about how many people kind of were just totally tuned out of politics until Bernie came along. And now those people are activists. They're, out there doing mutual aid. They're, part of their local organization that their local revolutionary socialist or communist organization, because they got inspired by Bernie Sanders. So I think that's also something important too, and something that Bernie's critics I don't think acknowledge enough, is like, yeah, whatever small amount of leftist action and organization we have right now is basically thanks to Bernie Sanders. It just is what it is. So that's also important to point out. But let's take a look at the rest of this conversation, because it does get pretty interesting right here.
Or about how you continue to hold power to account and what that looks like. But also, obviously, the counter argument is, well, you're well aware of all the barriers to the success of a third-party candidate. And ultimately, Bernie came a lot closer than, say, Ralph Nader did. And if you do get into the presidency, you do have a lot of power at your disposal to reform the system and, at least bring into power a new regime. So what do you say to that? Because to me, when I think about a third-party route, I mean, hijacking the Democratic Party seems pretty hopeless, but third-party route seems even more hopeless to me. So how do you get around that? Do you have to have some sort of democracy reform first, or what does that path ultimately look like?
No, they're both hopeless. I didn't say either third party would ever. Bernie, they were never going to allow Bernie to be the nominee. I mean, they didn't even hide it. So they're both hopeless. So the question is how to begin to push back against power. And Ralph, who has been fighting corporate power longer and probably with more integrity than any other American and knows more about it. I mean, when I came back from overseas, Ralph, who's brilliant, was just pushing book after book on me, a kind of private tutorial because I'd been overseas for 20 years and really didn't understand how corporate power worked. And, you know, he was my professor in that way. And his argument, which I believed, was that the idea, if we can pull 5, 10, 15 million people out of the Democratic Party into a third party movement, it will function to put pressure on the Democrats who will become frightened. That was always the plan. Ralph's didn't want to be president and never thought that he would be president. And I think that it is about putting pressure. In that sense, the Sanders delegates in 2016 were right when they walked out. And we have to stop thinking of achieving political power, but beginning to frighten political power. And that's a different goal.
I understand that argument. The thing that I keep coming back to, though, is in a certain sense, as you're pointing out, those delegates did take that courageous stand and frighten political power. Whether it's true or not, the left got blamed for voting for Jill Stein and electing Donald Trump. So you would think that would be okay. Well, you scared them. But it didn't seem to, it made the Democratic Party worse in a sense. All they did was demonize the left then and say these people are evil and bad.
They don't want to integrate them, then they demonize them more. So it actually has the opposite of the intended effect.
Well, ask yourself, why did they demonize them more?
They demonized them more because they blamed them for Trump.
No, because they got scared.
Right, but it works.
If it's 1 million or 15 million or 30 million, they could just demonize them too. Like, no matter how big you make the number, if you're not winning, they could just turn around and blame you and kick you out of any sort of coalition instead of bringing you into a coalition.
They blamed Ralph for the election of George W. Bush, which was completely false. They stopped the counting after 2 counties. They raced to the Supreme Court, and Bush got appointed by judicial fiat. Even Gore says he won now. So, of course, they're going to. The more powerful you become, the more you're going to be demonized. Look at Julian Assange. They've spent a lot of money and energy and time in terms of character assassination.
Well, so, Chris, doesn't that? Sorry to cut you off, but doesn't that disprove the point, though? Because if the idea is, look, you go outside the party system, you stand for something real, and then they're forced to integrate you within the system so that you actually have power and can make change. If every time there's a step outside of the system, they're like, well, you're at fault, you're to blame, and so you go play over there with your 5 or 10%, we don't care. Doesn't that disprove the point about stepping outside of the system like that?
I didn't ever say you were going to be integrated into the system. You're not. No, I think the fact that they will invest so much energy into demonizing you is because they're frightened. And that's the point. And
it's worth pointing out that, it's not like they integrated Bernie into the system either. It's not like they gave him any serious concessions to earn his support. It's not like they basically just, tricked him into endorsing their, candidate and then told him to piss off. So it's not like, Bernie is now a serious policy contributor to the Democratic Party either. His Build Back Better plan got fucking destroyed. So, they're going to belittle you and blame you regardless if you do it from within the system or as a third party like Jill Stein or Ralph Nader. Either way, they're not really going to take you seriously unless you, take the win with brute force. But yeah.
And just to jump in here, it's the only way, and this is what Chris Hedges is right on the money about, right? Is that, Bernie Sanders, he'll go in there and, he played all of his cards right, according to how NBC, MSNBC, CNN wanted him to at the end of the election, right? They wanted him to just get behind Joe. And, he asked, oh, my good friend Joe, can we please have $15 an hour minimum wage, please? The people need it to starving. Some, you can get fucked in the ass, Jack. Oh, thank you, Joe. Thank you for that fuck in the ass. Appreciated that. Good friend, Joe. Appreciate that. He's a leader. Well, later, Joe. It's like, oh, okay. So that's one option. We tried that one. That was an obvious failure. The other one is going with a guy like Howie Hawkins, who has absolutely no ability to inspire anybody. He's not going to turn out a crowd. He probably can't even draw a crowd in New York City. You know what I mean? Which was, that was the way the Green Party decided to go. Absolute failure. Okay, so we got those two absolute failures. What we could have had was what Chris Hedges is trying to articulate that I feel like Kyle just isn't necessarily understanding. What he's saying is Bernie aligns himself with those people who are willing to stand out, and then he makes a mockery of the system from the outside of it. He says, we're all going to be at X Park, which is right outside of where this event is going to be happening. Let's show up, 500,000 strong. We're all going to be picketing. We're going to have 16 different speakers. Vampire Weekend and the Strokes are going to play. We're going to keep bringing people out just like we were when I was campaigning, except now I'm campaigning for policies. Now I'm campaigning for change. Okay. They thought they didn't like me as a politician. Wait till they meet me as an activist. That's the kind of energy that Bernie Sanders and his team should have brought. That's what, everybody, they could have stayed together as a unit, financed it, right? We could still have Brianna Joy Gray doing Hear the Burn podcast if they paid her money to do it. I'm sure she wouldn't be opposed. We could keep this alive, and then it wouldn't become irrelevant. And that was Chris Hedges' very apt critique. And I think it's so obvious. So it's so obvious that Bernie did that wrong. So for Kyle and Krystal to be like, well, didn't he have to do that? Like, no, he didn't have to do that. What he had to do was keep his movement alive at all costs. And he didn't do that.
Yeah, exactly correct. There's a little bit more of this that we can listen to, and then we'll move on to our next topic. But yeah, there's just a couple more minutes in here that are worth listening to.
20 million people consistently voted for a third-party candidate. That would scare the hell out of the Democrats. And the whole idea of, of course they're going to blame Nader for Bush. Blaming Jill Stein for the election. Trump is insane. I mean, she didn't get any votes. The Green Party doesn't get any votes. I vote Green, by the way. I don't vote for Democrats.
I love this.
But
man.
no, it's
also, this just really does kind of make me sad because Chris Hedges wanted to run as a Green Party candidate in New Jersey. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. But he was going to have to give up his show on Contact to do so, which is ultimately why he didn't. But I would love to see what kind of damage Chris Hedges could do as a third-party candidate because, I still am invested in the third-party goal. I just am constantly frustrated by the, poor candidates that are put up by third parties. But if you get someone who's really charismatic, someone who's really, a compelling speaker and can really articulate the issues with our country in the way that Chris Hedges can, I'm not unconvinced that it can't work. I think it's possible. Jesse Ventura proved that when he won the governor's mansion in Minnesota as a third-party candidate in the 90s. It can happen if you have some name recognition. Obviously, Jesse had the name recognition that helped, but also his populist message, the fact that he didn't talk like a politician, the fact that he was correctly identifying issues and speaking to the people. He won that election as a third-party candidate, so it can be done. It is very possible, and I think I would love to see what someone like Chris Hedges or like Cornel West, could do as a third-party candidate. Even if they don't win, I still think it would be, it could be a big shift in the tide, so to speak. So I really wish that had happened. Hopefully he, decides to take another crack at it at some point. That would be so based to watch. But, with that aside, let's listen to the rest of this.
It's they're never going to integrate you into that structure. The fundamental question is the Democratic Party reformable? And a lot of people, around Bernie Sanders thought that it was. I don't believe that it is.
But isn't that kind of nihilistic, though? Because, I feel like if Trump, who's this absolute charlatan, con man, fraud, he came up in the Republican primary, granted all the bigotry and xenophobia and all the terrible stuff he said about Mexicans, Muslims, so on and so forth. He also said, I'm not going to do TPP. He also said, I'm not going to cut your Social Security, unlike these other idiots on stage. So here you have somebody who at the time people thought might be a real populist. Turned out he was a fake populist. And that guy was able to manhandle the Republican infrastructure and rise up and win. So I actually think it's defeatist and nihilistic to think that Bernie 2016 couldn't have won if he had some balls on him and if he was willing to fight in a way that apparently he wasn't willing to fight.
Well, Bernie, you have to look at Bernie's long trajectory. In 1996, Bernie was campaigning for Clinton after NAFTA, after the omnibus crime bill. Bernie knew what Clinton was doing and what Clinton was about, but he wanted to salvage his political position. Bernie has always been a de facto member of the Democratic Party and therefore was not telling the complete truth. He told partially the truth, but he wasn't going to take on the Democrats and the Democratic Party establishment, and that makes him, I think, morally and politically unfit to lead this resistance movement, because the Democrats are as culpable as the Republicans for the distortion that has created the American oligarchy and left, at this point, almost 3/4, certainly well over 60% of the country living in a state of poverty, or what they classify as near poverty. And so, I mean, I don't see how Bernie was the solution. What we've got is 1932 Weimar Germany, where the elites have gathered together and tossed up a figure like von Papen because they're frightened of the fascists. And we all should be frightened of the fascists, to recreate the ancien regime. Well, nobody from the left or the right wants the ancien regime, and that's the problem. The Democratic Party is utterly tone deaf to what's happening in the country and to how dangerous it has become, because it could happen as soon as the midterms, but certainly by 2024, there could no longer be any pretense of democracy. I would argue we don't live in a democracy now anyway, but there could not even be the pretense of a democracy.
Yeah, and just jump in here really quickly. This dude has historical analogies for everything, just right on the tip of his tongue. Have you noticed that? Like, I mean, whoo! And also, just go back, Nazi Germany. That's where we're at. Precursor to Nazi Germany right now, staring down the bullet over the gun. Right after he just told you change is hopeless and the failure is all damn near but inevitable. He's like, prepare for the downward spiral, basically. Holy shit, man. And the thing about Chris is that he manages to deliver all of this in a very professorial fashion that's like almost more clinical than it is like doomerist. You know what I mean? He's just like, yeah, this is where we found ourselves in history. Like, wonder how we'll navigate. Probably poorly. This is the correct avenue, but I doubt we'll seize it. Like, wow.
Yeah, totally. And a great conversation in general. I think it's really important that these conversations are had. And I respect both of these guys and Krystal, obviously, for, sticking to their guns and trying to have an honest conversation, try to get to the bottom of this stuff, because it is something we need to, figure out and come to a conclusion on before, the next opportunity. So really excellent conversation. Like I said, I appreciate them both sticking to their guns and their principles and trying to really make sense of the situation and figure out what the most, logical path going forward is for the left movement. Because it would help if we're all on the same page when the time comes, whether it's another Bernie Sanders style candidate or another, Ralph Nader style Green Party, third party candidate. It would be nice to have a united front and for everyone to be on the same page, not that that's going to happen, but you know what I mean? So anyway, great conversation. Like I said, check out the entire video if you have not already. They get into some other interesting conversations too that we're not going to have time to talk about today, but they get into vaccines and they get into even prostitution a little bit, which is an interesting little debate. So yeah, lots of good stuff. Obviously, as always, Chris Hedges, just one of the most compelling, articulate, and fearless truth tellers in the entire commentary, media space, journalism, whatever you want to call it. Huge respect for the guy. And this was a conversation long time coming. So glad it finally happened.